Thank you very much for coming. There's loads of you on the call, so we will make time for a Q&A at the end, but if things kind of come up as we go, please do put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them all at the end. Just a quick overview of what we do, because I know that quite a few of you haven't heard of us before. We work to bring people outside together to sort of connect more with our bodies and each other, and we help you build capabilities so you can just keep doing all of the things that you love. And we do this by offering courses and classes, and we teach playful training to build strength and skills and connection. So we asked you why now. A lot of you filled out the survey, and thank you very, very much for that. I actually don't have my speaker notes that have come up with this, but I know that mostly you answered either you didn't know where to start, or you felt like you'd been too busy and now felt like a good time. And why not before? We'd also asked you, and a lot of people got back to us on, sort of reasons why you hadn't done it before. Again, going back to sort of not knowing where to start and feeling busy and the barriers around that. And then kind of the reasons why you want to start, where you wanted to feel more capable, you wanted to keep joining in all of the things that you love, and you wanted to particularly feel more capable and age well. We know that we age into the shape of our habits, so everything that we can do today, this week, this month goes into our kind of movement bank account, which helps us create this buffer as we get older, which will help us with recovering from injuries and ultimately enable us to do all the things that we love and keep joining in all of the things that we want to do in life, whether that's going for a picnic with your grandchildren or continuing to walk a Munro, all of that kind of stuff. So today we're going to look at what the science says in terms of building bone mineral density and muscle mass, and kind of give you a framework of what you can use at home. This is a massive topic to try and get into an hour. So you will have the recording and you'll have all of these slides so you can go back and listen to them. There's a lot to get through. We will try and answer as much as we can in the Q&A section, but really all we want to do is kind of give you the scaffolding so that you've got some kind of framework going forwards. A lot of you got back to us about this course that we've been talking about building, and we'll go a little bit into that at the end as well. So from all the stuff that you might know of us already, from WildStrong, we teach a lot through play and through movement exploration and through getting outside and just kind of playing around with stuff, with movement. What feels good for us maybe doesn't feel good for other people. Today, we're just taking a tiny fraction of that, and we're kind of looking at the scaffolding. This is really want you to try and think throughout this whole talk, not to lose sight of the bigger picture. This is one element of it. Strength training for bone density and muscle mass is really important, but it is not everything. We're talking about eating your veggies. This is the stuff you got to do, but there's other nice stuff around it. Not to say it's boring, it's just today we're really focusing on this one thing. That's a big part of the bigger picture that is your rich and wonderful life. So to do that, I'm going to pass you on to Andrew, and then I'll be back at the end for some Q&As. Over to you. We're going to do a seamless in-person swap.
All right. Let me just go ahead and minimize this so I can see what I'm looking at. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it. As Jill said, a lot of what we're talking about today is sort of a different scope from what we normally focus on. My background is in strength and conditioning and also in public health and evidence-based practice. So it's a space I'm comfortable in. But as Jill alluded to, it is a very small part of how we look at the world. And what I mean is, by the very nature of the way that we create evidence, we can only create evidence based on the questions that we ask, and the way that we design studies and the way that we create our hierarchy of evidence is really going to favor certain kinds of interventions, which means that for today, if we're going to follow the evidence and really explicitly talk about what it is that the evidence says, we have to look at things like quantification, repeatability, essentially applying all that traditional gym way of looking at the world. Now, I would posit that actually you can get lots of the same benefits that we're going to talk about today without engaging in these specific set, rep, strength percentages schemes. And what I mean is that actually, if you're out in the real world and you're gardening and you're hiking and you're dancing and you're spending time with friends and you're doing the things that you love, you're probably sort of ticking a lot of these boxes tacitly in the background. But because what we're talking about today is evidence-based in a gym context, that's what I'm going to talk about. So our belief at WildStrong is we really want people to move together outside. We want people to do fun, practical, task-based movements. Give yourself the opportunity to build skills and confidence by engaging with the world. Um, but what based on what we heard from all the feedback, okay, what we really found out that there's a lot of confusion, especially on the internet and social media, and people have a lot of questions. And these questions, based on your responses, seem to cluster around the idea of aging well, maintaining independence and everyday capabilities. There are a lot of questions people had where to start, and then also simple ideas at home, a realistic plan that people can follow so they can build confidence. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. As much as I can, I'm going to try to keep this focused on just answering the questions that were shared with us rather than spending too much time talking about other ways of doing things. Now, with that said, one of the things I do want to talk about is this idea of a prescriptive emergent continuum. Normally at WildStrong, we do most of our lessons and most of our planning on this emergent side of things. That means really focusing on things like exploration, task-based challenges, this idea of facilitating over coaching, focusing on qualitative progress, focusing on play and games, problem solving, things like that. But for today, most of today's talk is going to be on the prescriptive side of things. So that means we're going to be looking at specific skills, rules-based, top-down questions. So, for example, at WildStrong, we might ask a question, how could you get down and back up again while holding a heavy object? If we're applying this more prescriptive model, we might say, well, um, here's how you squat, and squatting is beneficial for reasons A, B, C. Or we might say, here's how we do a barbell deadlift, and this is beneficial for these reasons. One is not better than the other. They're just different tools for making sense of the world. So I was talking about this idea of prescriptive. This is when you're working towards a specific technique or a best way of doing things, gaining some kind of technical proficiency. How do you get better at squatting? And this will have lots of cueing, correcting, things like that. So imagine working with a PT in a gym. Emergent is more, here's a movement problem, how do you solve it? Like I said, normally at WildStrong and Nature Moves, we focus mostly on task-based training, which would be getting down, getting back up again. How do you get from point A to point B, getting there and back, getting over things, under things, around things, getting out of the way, reaching, picking up, moving. This is a very different way of looking at the world than in the gym. Whereas in the gym, you're saying, okay, now we're going to do some deadlifts, or now we're going to focus on muscles that are good for the spinal erectors, or now we're going to do some squats and we're going to try to work on your quadricep muscles. They're just different ways of looking at the world. So the why of today's session today is specifically, let me just open this up. The why of today is going to be specifically that we are here to talk about quantifiable traditional strength training and what the evidence says about that. So this is going to be a very specific why I'm going to try to stick with. And the other thing I'm going to try to talk about today is ignoring the shiny apples. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But essentially, this idea of the goal is to keep the goal the goal. So first off, I want to talk about the evidence. Now, the good thing about the evidence is that we have a preponderance of evidence. We have a really great evidence base that exercise is good for us. That's great. Okay. We also have a really great exercise or evidence base that exercise is very good for long-term health. It is very good for maintaining or even improving bone mineral density, which is going to be really important. And that is such an important predictive factor for things like falling, health, long-term independence, and things like that. So I pulled from a lot of different sources today. Here are some of the sources that we pulled our recommendations from. At the end of the presentation, when you get this as a PDF, I have all these as links. Now, a lot of times it's not always helpful to go to primary sources because they can be confusing. But the good thing about a lot of the sources today is they're consensus statements or public statements or recommendations. So they're specifically made to be public facing with really, really specific guidelines. And what's really nice about all these studies, all this evidence is they're all pointing in the same direction. They're over and over and over again, you see the same recommendations. So, what are those recommendations? Well, if we're talking about long-term strength, aging well, bone density, things like that, almost all the recommendations, without major exceptions, are going to say some form of the following, which is high intensity progressive resistance can prevent or reverse bone loss and improve bone mineral density. If you see BMD, it's just bone mineral density. By high intensity, I want to go ahead and talk about that now. By high intensity, what I mean is moving heavy weights that are a high percentage of your one rep max. So moving weights that you could move maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times that you wouldn't be able to move 10, 12 times in a row. And we'll get into more detail about that. Um, if bone density is important to you, you do want to incorporate some form of impact movement. So that could be things like skipping, jogging, uh, gentle versions of jumping and landing, going upstairs, going downstairs. If you're hiking, if you like to hike, going on inclines and declines. So essentially putting your body in a position where it has to absorb some of your weight. If you are concerned about osteoporosis and osteopenia, which I know a lot of people in this group today are, then you need to make sure that you focus on exercise that stimulates the femur, the femoral head. So as your leg bone goes into your pelvis, and also spending time stimulating your lower back. So that means exercises that are going to stress in a good way and stimulate your lower body and your lower back from a few different angles. Generally, we want to hit about 2 to 3 sessions a week. Um, and in terms of how much work we do, we want to do about 3 sets of 6 reps per movement. I'll talk about all this, don't worry. Generally, you want to work at an intensity about 80% of your one rep max, and we'll talk about how we can figure that out today. There is lots of evidence talking about yoga and Pilates. Yoga and Pilates can be really great for balance, really good for fall resiliency. Most evidence seems to suggest that they're probably not going to be enough for improving your bone mineral density. We've had lots of high quality studies come out in the last few years, and while there are loads of benefits for yoga, there's one or two, I'd say maybe medium, low quality results that say that yoga does have some benefits, but then a lot of the most recent research says that yoga doesn't. So it does mean we want to get some sort of impact external weight um, going here. And then in the same vein, walking is great. I think walking is one of the best things that people can do, but walking by itself is also probably not enough to get the benefits that we're talking about. Now, that being said, if you are hiking and you do some rucking or something with a weighted backpack and you're doing uneven terrain up and down, a bit of scrambling, that's going to have lots of benefits. So, there's walking, which is strolling through a park, and then there's hiking in the outdoors, which will have different benefits, and that is great. If you're walking, continue to do that. So, what I wanted to talk about is this idea of not getting distracted by shiny apples. Um, and I think we all see this in our lives if we spend any time on the internet, any time on social media. We say, okay, I'm going to do something. I've got a plan. I'm going to do this. This is exactly what I want to do. But you know what? It'd be kind of cool if I did a couch to 5K. So, okay, so I'm going to do my strength training. I'm going to do a couch to 5K. But you know what? Actually, I saw some really cool mobility movements. I saw someone doing animal flow the other day. I'm going to do a little bit of animal flow as well. So that's what I'm going to do. And then also I'm going to do a little bit of forest bathing because I know that's good for me. And I'm also going to make sure I get enough vitamin D. And also I think I might try this new low carb, high protein diet. And before you know it, instead of just keeping the goal of one thing, you start doing all these different things. I'm not saying you can't pursue all these different things. I just think it's important to say what your goal is and to kind of state a scope of practice, kind of a remit for what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is strength training for bone mineral density and long-term health span. So there's a lot of things I'm not going to talk about today, but that is by design. So our why today is to talk about simple, realistic strength, effective training, and focusing on building strength and bone density. So here's an example of what it might feel like when we're online. And we hear about all these things. Oh, I need my core strength, Tabata. Do I need to do AMRAP? Um, should I be doing cold water immersion? Do I need a sauna? Do I need to worry about my gut microbiome? I think that all these things are probably important, and I imagine a lot of these things are very beneficial, and they might be things that I practice privately. but we are focusing on a simple progressive program today that's going to maximize bone mineral density, focus on longevity, and focus on getting stronger. So that is our goal for today. So what are we going to talk about? Well, first we're going to talk about how do we define heavy lifting. We know that a lot of these benefits we get from strength training only comes from progressive strength training of a certain exercise intensity. So I want to talk about how we can define that. Within that, how much work do I need to do? How many reps and sets? What are reps and sets? Maybe you don't know that, and that's fine. How much do I need to rest in between work? How hard should this feel? How do I think about making progress? How often do I need to do this? What movement should I do? And how long will this take per session? How long will this take per week? How long do I need to do this for the rest of my life? And that is actually the answer. If you're engaging in strength training programs, generally it takes about 6 months to about a year to start seeing significant benefits. In terms of bone mineral density, you'll start seeing other benefits much sooner. But if you are coming here specifically because you're concerned about osteopenia or lower bone density, then we're really looking at about 6 years, sorry, 6 months to a year before we really start to see those benefits. But we can see that with certain programs, people can improve their BMD, especially at the head of the femur and their lower back. They can see improvements of 1, 2, 3% every year, which might not sound like a lot, but when you consider that, especially in postmenopausal women, they could be losing 1 or 2% bone density every year. That actually it's a big net gain. And every percentage point that you maintain of your bone mineral density is going to have huge effects in terms of fall resiliency and independence later in life. So just a few definitions. Now, like I said, we were talking about gym stuff today. So this can feel a little bit overwhelming at first. It doesn't need to. Like Jill said at the beginning, this is just kind of a scaffolding so we can create a common language. If you don't take anything else away from this talk, just what I'll say is just find a few lower body movements that are heavy enough so that it's really hard to do about 6 or 7 times and do those movements about 3 times a week. Gradually add weight. That's all it needs to be. Everything else is just going to be backfill. But all that evidence says just move some heavy objects 2 or 3 times a week, and you'll be fine. You don't need to overthink this. You can if you enjoy it, but if it feels like too much, then don't worry about it. So first thing I want to talk about is this idea of a repetition. If you hear me use the word rep, that's what I'm talking about in gym lingo. And a rep is just one completion of a movement. So for example, one press up, one body weight squat is one repetition. So generally all the way up and all the way down, or all the way down and all the way up is one repetition. So that's just one completion of a movement. Generally, we're going to be looking at doing about 6 or 7 of these repetitions per set and finding a weight that's challenging at that number. A set is just a group of reps separated by rest. So let's say I do 6 squats, I take a 2-minute rest. I do 6 squats, I take a 2-minute rest. I do 6 squats, I do 2-minute rest. I've just done 3 sets of 6 reps of the squat. Resting is exactly what it sounds like. It's just taking a break. So this is going to be important for building strength, and it's one of the things I like to talk about right away. A lot of times people feel bad taking rest, especially when they first start strength training, because they feel like they should be doing more, especially if you're used to doing HIIT classes, Tabata classes, AMRAPs, things like that. If you've been mixing your conditioning with your strength training, which is totally fine, I do that sometimes. But if you're doing that, you're going to be getting a different stimulus than what we need. Eventually, we want to get people comfortable enough so that they can do 6 reps of something that feels really, really heavy, challenging, but safe, hard enough so that they'll want another break before they do it again. If you just do 6 easy reps, take a 10-second break, do 6 easy reps, take a 10-second break, you're not going to be working at a weight that's heavy enough to stimulate the adaptations that we want. If you see me write something 3 by 6, that just means 3 sets of 6 repetitions. And if you hear me say the word session, I just mean how much work you're doing in a window of time. Oh, hi, Lawrence, can you please go on mute? Thanks. Okay. So one of the first questions we need to talk about is what do we mean by heavy? When we are in gym world, when we're in strength and conditioning world, if we talk about this word intensity, and we're not talking about running, We're not talking about perceived intensity in like a CrossFit class or something, but we're talking about it in sense of strength training. We're talking about percentage of your one rep max. One rep max is just what is the heaviest weight you can move one time that you couldn't do again. So for example, um, if I had a really, let's just say a really heavy box, and I really got myself tight, I got into good position and I lifted it one time and I put it back down again, but then I tried to lift it a second time and I couldn't, that would be my one rep max. If I could lift it two times, it would be my two rep max. Three times, it would be my three rep max. The more repetitions you can complete of a weight, the lower percentage of your one rep max. That sounds confusing, but it's not. If I can lift something six times, it's going to be lighter than something that I can only lift once. If I can lift something 20 times, it's going to be really, really light. So as your rep max goes up in a given movement, it means that the percentage is going to go down. So for example, if I'm working at 100% of my one rep max, I'm going to do it one time. If I'm working, say, around 80% of my one rep max, it's going to be something I can lift about 80 times. There are all these different formulas for figuring it out, but everybody's different. But just know that the heavier something is, the less you're going to be able to lift it. It's actually really sensible. Um, for strength training and mineral density, generally you want to lift in a range somewhere between our 5 and 8 rep max. So we're looking at lifting somewhere around 87 to 80% of our one rep max. You don't need to feel like you're getting there right away. What I mean is you can do a few sessions of just starting off nice and early and seeing how that feels. And then over time, as you add a little weight and progression, you might notice that the sessions start to feel relatively harder and harder. And that's fine. You always want to be pushing yourself. That's when that rest comes in, and that's when we'll talk about progression. Uh, don't worry if you're brain fogged over with all those numbers and percentages. Basically, I just want you to find something heavy that you can lift about 6 times per set. Six isn't a magic number. Um, I just picked six because it's a good number. It's not too heavy, it's not too light, and it's easy to do math with. Generally, if you go too heavy, if you start trying to lift around your 3 rep max, that's when people can start to lose confidence and worry about injuries. And if you go much lighter than that, we start losing the benefits of the bone mineral density. So the takeaway from this slide is we want to find a weight that is challenging at about 6 reps, and we'll talk about that. All right. This is just what I was talking about over in the other slide. You can just see that there's a relationship between percentage of your one rep max and number of repetitions allowed, or that you're capable of doing. So if you're working at 100% of your one rep max, you can do it once. If you're working at about 85% of your one rep max, you can probably do it about 6 times. If you're working about 80%, you can probably do it 8 times. These numbers are not exact. Everything we're talking about today is a general trend. So don't worry too much about it. Maybe, maybe there's something that you can lift whatever 10 times, but it's actually closer to whatever 83% of your one rep max. Don't worry about it. It's just how it feels to you. We're not going to worry about external percentages. Um, one of the things I want to talk about that comes up a lot in various forms of strength and resistance training is that strength training, resistance training can be good for all kinds of things. There's different sort of adaptations that we can elicit. And like with everything else, it's going to be on a continuum. So this is sort of a really famous graphic that's been around for years. And at the top, that RM stands for rep max. And then we can talk about the training goal. And all we're seeing is that as the rep max goes up, we're going to start tapping into different training goals. So strength, which is what we're focusing on today, is going to be somewhere around that sets of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, give or take. But you're still going to get strength benefits at higher numbers. But what we'll see is that if you look at the lower rows, hypertrophy and muscular endurance, as your reps get higher and volume gets higher, you're going to start getting less and less in the way of strength benefits, and you're going to start getting more hypertrophy, which is muscle growth. So if you look at bodybuilders, often they'll do sets of 12, maybe 15 reps, depending on what their goals are, and they'll do lots and lots of sets. They try to get a lot of volume to get their muscles as big as possible. Generally, strength training is not thought to make people's muscles as big, not having as much of this sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And then we've got muscular endurance. Oh, thank you. You've got muscular endurance, which is going to be even higher reps. So as you start going into that 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, that's going to be mostly muscular endurance. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I think a lot of times when people start strength training, they feel more comfortable, or especially I think it's safe to say that women are drawn to higher reps. So I think we've all heard conversations about the famous pink dumbbell, the little 2 kg dumbbell that people can do reps and reps and reps over and over again. If you have an implement or if you're doing a movement that you can do 20 times, 30 times, you're not going to get the benefits that we're talking about today. You probably will get stronger overall, but you're really going to be focusing more on muscular endurance. As I said before, this is a continuum. So if you do a little bit more, a little bit less, that's fine. If you work a little bit heavier, a little bit lighter, that's fine. But we really, if we're getting the benefits we're talking about today, if we can get that bone mineral density and all the other benefits that come along with it, we'd really want to find a weight or a movement that's challenging at about 5, 6, or 7 reps. How long do you rest for? Now, rest is really important because, like I said, if you don't get enough rest, you're not going to be able to work at the intensity you need. So, if you're treating this like a boot camp or a high intensity interval training workout where you're trying to get yourself as tired as possible, as out of breath as possible, that's chasing a different goal. Generally, if we're strength training in between sets, we want to have about 2 to 5 minutes of rest. For today, I'm just going to say about 2 minutes of rest is fine because even 2 minutes can feel like quite a lot. If you ever go to an Olympic weightlifting gym or a powerlifting gym and you see all these big, strong people, it's going to look like most of the time they're sitting around doing nothing because in order to tap into that higher percentage strength range, it means that if they do a heavy set of squats or a heavy set of deadlifts or a heavy set of snatches, depending on what they're training in, they might just do one snatch and then take a 3 minute break if they're doing power training like Olympic lifting style training. If it's a power lifter, maybe they'll do a set of 3, 4, 5 squats and take a 4 or 5 minute rest. And that might not look like a lot of work, but because they're working at such a high intensity, a lot of these people will be moving, 200 kilos or so. Then their body needs some time to recover. When we first start strength training, we probably don't need quite as much rest, but you still want to give yourself about 2 minutes rest just to make sure you can hit those sets over and over and over again. Otherwise, what might happen is you might try to do your first set of, let's just use squats as an example, and maybe you get your 6 reps on the squat, and then you only take a 20-second break and you get back, and then you've only done 4 reps. And then it gets too hard, and then you take a 20-second break, and then you only do 2 reps. So what you've done, even though it feels like you're working much harder, you're actually not getting as much work done, and it means your body's not going to get the stimulus that it needs to adapt the way that we want it to. So for today, just think about 2 minutes of rest in between doing the same movement is probably good. One of the questions I get all the time when I'm working with people in person is like, well, what if I get bored? 2 minutes seems like a long time just to sit around. Well, eventually the weight's going to feel heavy enough so that if you once it starts getting heavy, you're going to look forward to the rest because it's going to start feeling harder. You're going to get much stronger, but also in a way, lifting is going to feel a little bit harder. At first, you might feel like you have too much free time in between your sets. If you do, that's fine. Do a little stretch. If you're doing lower body stuff, get in whatever kind of stretch you like. If you want to, you can check your phone. I tend to try not to check my phone when I'm training because it's easy to get distracted. You start reading, you start looking at TikToks and everything like that before you know you've taken a 10-minute rest because a good strength training session doesn't need to take long. The session design we're going to talk about today can be done in about 24 minutes, so it doesn't take a long time if you just focus on it. And again, like I said, avoid the temptation to cut down on rest. We don't want this to turn into conditioning or high intensity interval training. The goal is to focus on strength. Um, in the long run, the longer you rest, the stronger you'll become as long as you focus on progress over time. Next question I get a lot is how difficult should this feel? And because I don't want you to feel like you need a calculator, I don't want you to feel like you need to start calculating percentages and things like that once you get going. We're going to use what's called rate of perceived exertion, RPE. And RPE is just a fancy way of saying how hard was this on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 is really easy. 1 is just you're reclining in a hammock, you're having a nice time. Whereas 10 will be the hardest thing you've ever done. 10 is running up a mountain while you're carrying a 50-kilo pack while you're being chased by wolves or something like that. It's really hard. Um, Basically, most of your training should feel about an 8. Okay, so what does an 8 mean? An 8 means that it should feel challenging. And if let's say you did your set of squats, and I said, how hard did that feel on a scale of 1 to 10? They say, oh, maybe about an 8. And say, okay, well, how many more reps do you think you could have done? Could you have done 3 more reps? No way. Could you have done 2 more reps? Yeah, maybe. It would have been really tough, but maybe I could have. So this idea of an RP of 8 means that essentially you still have about 2 reps left if you needed to. And what I mean is I never want you to feel like you're working to failure. We don't need to work to absolute muscular failure in a program like this. We just need to stimulate our body enough so that it adapts by putting down more calcium and minerals, and so it adapts by making our muscles stronger and denser. So every set we're shooting for should feel about an 8 out of 10 on difficulty. 8 out of 10 is going to be difficult, different for everybody. And it might feel arbitrary, but people are very, very good at saying what is difficult or not difficult for them. And you know what? Over time, maybe your sense of what's difficult will change, but that's okay. It's all progress. So maybe you might find that you start enjoying moving heavy weights, and what used to feel like a 9 will now feel like a 7 to you. And that's just all part of progress. Next question is, how do I progress? And this could be, I don't want this to be too confusing. I don't want to get bogged down on it. So you can look at it again afterwards. But basically, um, what I'm going to recommend that we do for our strength training is we find some movements and we do 3 sets of 6 in that movement. So 3 sets of 6 repetitions of squats, 3 sets of 6 repetitions of some kind of pickup movement or deadlift movement. And the way we progress is, if in the week you're able to do all your movements, so you're able to get 6, 6, and 6 in your squats, 2 sessions in a row, go ahead and progress by making it a little bit heavier. Now, we're starting to get outside the scope of this talk today because I'd like to do another session when we talk about progression and how you can think about progression, because progression is going to be very different depending on what you're doing. If you're doing press ups and body weight, progression looks much different than if you're using a barbell. It looks much different than if you're using some milk jugs filled with water. Generally, my recommendation would be, if you want to find a cheap and scalable way to train heavy, I really think that sandbags are a very good option. So what that might look like is that if you've done two sessions in a row and you've hit all your numbers, just get a cup of sand, pour an extra cup of sand into your sandbag, so it's maybe like half a kilo heavier, and try it again next week. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need to worry about percentages. Generally, um, for most gym programs, they would say you want to add about 5% weight if you're going to progress, or about 1 to 2 kilos, depending on the movement. But that's relative to everybody. You don't need to get stuck on that. In terms of training goals and volume, like I said, we're focusing on strength. So we want to hit about 6 repetitions, and we want to do about 2 to 6 sets per session. That's when we come to exercise. If we're doing squats, we want to do reps of 6 squats, and we want to get, I'd say, about 3 sets in. So the takeaway is we want to do about 3 sets of each movement. And this is just to make sure we get enough volume to stimulate. This is what pretty much all the major organizations recommend. In terms of whether it's public health authorities or gym associations or strength and conditioning, they would say probably about 3 sets is enough. Then talking about goal load and repetitions, basically we want to be somewhere around 85% of our 1 rep max. That's just about 6 heavy reps. And that's just the number that you need to think about. You don't need to think about the 85%. You can just think about the 6%, and that's fine. All right, so I'm going to put it all together. Now, I know this can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't need to. This slide and the next few will kind of have the information. Obviously, Jill and I will be around if you have any questions. So always go back to think about your why. What is our why? Why do we want to do strength training? Well, we want to focus on strength and increase bone density. How do we do that? We want to work somewhere between 80 to 85% of our 1 rep max. So I'm recommending 6 challenging reps per set. How often do you need to do this? About 2 to 3 sessions a week. 2 sessions is good. 3 sessions is fine, is probably better. But you are going to have sort of diminished marginal returns. And what I mean is, once a week is much, much better than nothing. Twice a week is better than once. 3 times a week is better than 2 times a week. But then after that, the benefits start to go down. You don't need to feel like you need to do this 6 times a week. I don't want this to take away from everything else you love doing. You'll hear me say it again, but if you're part of a dancing group, don't stop dancing just so that you can get this training in. Don't stop gardening. Don't stop going out with your friends. This is something that can be done in, a 20, 25-minute session twice a week. Adding an extra 40, 50 minutes to your week is probably going to be fine. This is something you can do at your house. But if there are other things you love doing, don't sacrifice them. Just find a way to fit this in. Um, how much do I have to do? 3 sets, 6 repetitions per movement. Probably going to do about 4 movements in a session. In terms of rest, about 2 minutes of rest before repeating the same movement again. Which movements? Um, well, you want to do some sort of anterior lower body movement, some kind of posterior lower body movement, some kind of pushing, and some kind of pulling. What does that mean? It means that you want to do something that looks like a squat or a lunge, something that is going to, you're going to feel it in the front of your thighs, so your quadricep muscles, um, the kind of muscles that you feel if you're walking upstairs. When they start to burn, that's what we're talking about. And muscles that do that are going to be good for your lower body strength, your lower body power, which is very good for fall resiliency. They're also going to stimulate the neck of your femur, which is one of the most important parts of your body that you want to make sure you're putting down um, more bone mass. And then posterior just means using the back part of your body. So something you feel a little bit in your lower back in a nice way, a little bit in the back of your thighs, a little bit in your bum muscles. So that's your posterior chain. And that's generally done by picking things up, often deadlifts. You want to do some kind of pushing. Doesn't really matter if it's a press up or an overhead press. We don't want to overthink this, but just something that you can do that you can progress and some kind of pulling. So anyone who's got any kind of exercise experience, they might be rolling their eyes right now because you're saying, "Oh, that's so simple." Yep, that's right. We just want it to be simple. Um, the last thing I want to talk about, which is also going to be outside the scope of this, but I just want to touch on it, is thinking about range of motion. And what I mean is you want to try to be consistent in your range of motion. You want to be able to identify points of performance and maintain those points. So all I mean is that if you're doing press ups, okay, you want to make sure that your press ups always look the same, even if weight gets heavier. If you're doing squats, you want your squats to look the same because there's a tendency sometimes as the weight gets heavier, we move a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. So you might think you're getting stronger sometimes, but if you actually look at how much you're moving, you used to be doing these deep squats on week 1, and maybe by week 10, all of a sudden you're just doing little knee bends. So it's good to have someone to kind of look at your form, maybe a friend, you can check it out against YouTube or something, have a sense of what you want the movements to look like. So I was talking about what movements do I choose? And I said the simplest options are going to be 4 movements in a session, some kind of squat or lunge, some kind of hinge or pickup, some kind of push or press, and some kind of pull. Um, I've got my recommendations that I'll share, and then you'll be able to find them on YouTube, or you can talk to us. There's loads of great resources out there. But remember, don't go chasing golden apples. Pick what you want to do and stick with it. Especially if you don't think that you're the kind of person that's going to get really, really into strength training. Don't overcomplicate it. Just remember, perfect is the enemy of good enough. Pick something and stick with it, and you're going to get benefits. So what does a session look like? Well, I don't want to get too bogged down on this. Hang on, let me just check time. I think, how am I doing on time here? I've got, all right. Well, we want to leave time for Q&A. So, what does a session look like? Essentially, what it looks like is you do 2 supersets, so 2 sets of movements. Um, with 2 minutes of rest in between, and then you do another set of 2 movements. I've gotten this written down specifically, but what I would say is go ahead and do something like 6 squats, and then do 6 inverted rows, 6 squats, 6 inverted rows, 6 squats, 6 inverted rows with 2 minutes more or less in between, and then go do the next one, which will be same thing as before, except just a deadlift and a push. And there's nothing magic about this order. It's just muscle groups that aren't going to interfere with each other. A superset is just a way to get more work in at the same time. Um, so here is my very technical write-up that if I were working with someone in person, I would write it down and it would look like that. Um, and essentially, part 1, if you look at the 3x6 superset, that would take about 12 minutes with rest. Part 2 would take about 12 minutes of rest, probably even less. realistically, I guarantee you can get all this work done in 24, 25 minutes or less. Um, what else? Well, as much as you can, continue to go outside and participate in the physical world and the social opportunities around you. Like I said, I don't want you to give up on gardening or dancing or hiking with your friends. Make sure you incorporate lots of real life activities. Um, we have all sorts of benefits that are difficult to quantify. Sorry, what I meant to say is going outside and doing things is going to have all kinds of benefits. There's so many benefits to going out and gardening and moving wheelbarrows and picking up potting soil and things like that, that you're going to get a lot of the benefits that we were just talking about. They're just quantified differently. Same thing. If you're still going out and hiking and you're going up hills and down hills, work that in. That's going to have all these benefits, okay? Strength training is great, and I do it regularly, and I recommend that people do it regularly, but there are many ways to get the benefits of it. This is just a way that's easy to write down. Just remember that. Um, One of the things I didn't talk about much earlier, but one of the other big benefits, or one of the other things we want to focus on if we're focusing on bone mineral density, is this idea of impact movements. So most of the literature would say that you want to get about 50 impacts a day, which could just be jumping in place 50 times, skipping rope. It doesn't even have to be that intense. You can march. Going up and down stairs would count. If you're physically active, you're getting this anyway. But if it's hard for you to find opportunities to move, then maybe adding in something like when you're at the computer, just go ahead and get in 25 jumps, take a rest in 25 jumps. It doesn't have to be big, just little skips, like if you're skipping rope is fine. All right, that is, I think, what I want to talk about for right now. I wanted to leave aside about 15, 20 minutes to open up some questions, so it's not just me talking, so we're pretty much bang on. I'll let Jill go ahead and field and do anything else.
Andrew,
Do you want me to?
I'm just I'm going to read a few of the questions that have come up. And guys, if you want to type some more, and we'll leave, we'll try and get through as many as we can. Yes, the recording will be sent out. Right, I've got one from, hang on, sorry, I've lost my questions. Where have they gone? Okay, so here's one from Lisa. How suitable is lifting heavy for people with issues such as prolapse and hernias? Is it a case of building up slowly so it doesn't have detrimental effects? Andrew, do you want to field that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think the way that you framed it is really good, Lisa. All systems in our body can adapt to good stress. So what I mean is, if you slowly introduce any kind of stimulating stress to our body, we have lots of different ways that we can adapt. Whether it's bone density, whether it's tendons, whether it's tissue integrity, all these different things can adapt with time. Now, whenever we've had an acute injury, um, that can really change things. So what I mean is, for example, if you've had someone who has shoulder surgery, then we're sort of working in a different situation. Your body is always going to have the capability to heal up to a certain point. But then we need to be realistic about giving A, your body enough time, B, getting the dosage of stimulation right to make sure that it's actually enough so to stimulate healing. And then I guess finally just also being mindful that if there's structural damage to your body, like if you're missing a bone or if you're missing some cartilage or something, then that's going to make things obviously much tougher. Um, if we're talking about things like hernia and prolapses, then this is a really tricky one because a lot of the benefits that we get in terms of bone mineral density are going to be in the same intensity range um, that are going to start, I guess I'll say, testing the integrity of your internal systems. So it's the sort of thing you want to go into very, very conservatively and progressively. And maybe instead of working at that 6 rep range, maybe starting off at like an easy, like say 10, 12 rep range, and then following a few things. A lot of times when people are engaging in weightlifting, they're going to do what's called the Valsalva maneuver, where they'll hold their breath and kind of close up their glottis right here, and you'll kind of see that they expand out their stomach and they try to increase their internal pressure as much as possible. Olympic weightlifters and powerlifters do this. If you're someone who has a history of high blood pressure, or someone who's had histories with hernias and things like that, you really want to avoid that really high intensity internal pressure, especially at first. It's something you can slowly add in at time. But if you have a medical condition, a clinical medical condition, definitely you should speak with a doctor, with a GP, and as much as you can, try to see if you can get a meeting with a physiotherapist, someone recommended through NHS, and have them talk about the plans, and they'll have a better idea. Just because with any kind of acute injury or surgery, that's going to be a case by case basis. But I want to say that with enough time and patience, even people who have history of various hernias can definitely get back to heavy weightlifting. There's lots of cases of people getting back to more or less full strength. It's just about taking your time and not rushing it.
Um, Andrew, I'm going straight into the next one
Hmm.
from Kath. There are clearly more women on this webinar than men. Do men need to do strength training as much as women, or are they more likely to be doing it already? Or is it that women are more likely to have sort of neglected strength training? This is a very good question. I like it a
It's a
lot.
very good question, and it grows across the board. Almost everything you asked is probably correct. If you go into a gym, not so much now, but certainly 10, 15 years ago, you'd see almost all the men doing strength training, and then the stereotype would be that you'd see women doing stretching or yoga or doing cardio. And I think generally people are drawn to what they feel like they're good at. So generally, though not all the time, men tend to be stronger and less mobile, whereas women tend to be more mobile and less strong. So a lot of women, I think, are drawn to things like yoga because they can really express what they're good at, whereas men like to move heavy things but get very embarrassed sometimes if they can't touch their toes. Um, at a biological level, because of the way the hormones and everything work and the fact that men carry more muscle anyway, and higher bone density, men are just less likely to have to worry about osteoporosis and osteopenia. It can happen, but it's much less likely. So men sort of biologically are already going to be predisposed to having higher bone density and less predisposed to osteopenia. In terms of their preferences, whether social or whatever, they're more likely to be drawn to activities where they engage in that sort of physical activity and also high impact. If you think about things like football and soccer and playing sports. Um, so men probably do not necessarily need to do more strength training in terms of bone density, but everybody benefits from it. Um, and people of all genders and all ages are going to benefit from strength training. There's pretty much not a population that's not going to benefit from it. But I do think that with women, the culture is getting better, and there's more support groups and just a more supportive culture in general. It's being normalized, and I think that's going to be a real net benefit. Are there any points I missed on that one, Jill?
I think that's good. I'm going to keep going through these so we can
Yep.
try and get through them. There was a good question from Julie Wrigley. Where is it? Is strength definitely a better goal than hypertrophy? I expect hypertrophy would be improving body composition, metabolism, and other health benefits. Do we sacrifice anything by focusing on strength versus hypertrophy?
No, that's a really good question. No, I would say no, mainly because these things are in a continuum, and a lot of the distinctions that people make come from sports and conditioning or competitive bodybuilding and things like that. And already that's so far on the end of the normal population curve, that sort of focusing on one and the other is almost you almost don't need to worry about. And what I mean is if you're someone who hasn't previously been engaging in any kind of strength training, you are going to experience hypertrophy um, as well. In terms of bone density, if that's your goal, you do want to focus on that higher intensity, lower rep range, because um, a lot of the tissues in our body, I mean, we're specifically talking about bones here, are just going to be stimulated at the higher range plus impact. But a lot of the other benefits that we see in terms of whatever hormone profiles, overall health, there's some interesting benefits with like how well your muscles communicate with your body and things like that. you're going to get all those benefits from strength training as well. In a way, it's an artificial dichotomy. But if you're someone who enjoys working in slightly higher rep ranges, that's absolutely fine. Um, when we think about hypertrophy nowadays, we think about it in relationship to bodybuilders, or people who sort of have physiques that would have been very rare 100 years ago. I mean, and obviously we can all see pictures of hunters and gatherers and various populations who look stacked. But the level of muscularity that you see in high-end bodybuilders or fitness athletes or physique athletes and things like that is something that would be pretty impossible to maintain both before readily available steroids in the case of bodybuilders, and also in the past we just wouldn't have the caloric excess to support that in terms of extra protein and things like that. So, when we talk about hypertrophy, we don't need to be talking about looking like a bodybuilder. And as long as that's not necessarily your goal, though there's nothing wrong with it, engaging in regular strength training is going to give you the benefits of muscle density and things like that.
I'm going to move on to the next question. There's a really good one and I can't find it. Oh, there we go. I'd be interested to know how long you should take to build up on to your weights. As is there not a risk of injury by starting straight away with weights if you haven't previously lifted already? I'm going to start that answer and you can follow up with that, Andrew.
Sure, you go
Um,
first.
there will always be a basis when you start anything new that you need to build up the foundation. So you need to build up your familiarity with the movements that you're doing and your confidence in them and making sure that it feels good for you. And maybe within that, there will be movements that don't feel like a good fit for you. If there's a movement that just doesn't feel like a good fit for you, then normally you'll need to find some other sort of substitutions or a work around it. But with the not going up too heavy, I'm going to say, and Andrew will jump in on this, but particularly when working with women, it will take us months to get them to the weights that you need to be working at to really get into strength training, because I think the barriers that we have as women are there's so much confidence and complexity around our self-belief and this kind of I don't know, I think a lot of us just feel like it's not something that's for us and that we're not very strong and that we can't possibly lift heavy things and that we'll do our back in if we do. Whereas when you start strength training with men, it's often that you spend months trying to pull them down from going immediately to the heaviest weight and then immediately picking their back out because they pick up something really heavy. There is like a weird sort of gender divide that we encounter a lot, and I'm sure any of the other trainers on here would agree with that. Andrew, do you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is right. I think ego or confidence manifests itself differently amongst different people. Um, and not all the time, but many men, if they're feeling insecure, they kind of want to, whatever, show confidence, that they'll often use weights that are maybe are heavier than appropriate, and vice versa for women. Um, weight training, resistance training is incredibly safe. In terms of hours of participation, it's going to be one of the safest activities that you can engage in, certainly much safer than running. Certainly, much safer than field sports like football, soccer, rugby, netball, etc. So if we look at hours of participation, it's very safe. I think there is this mystique around weightlifting and resistance training, which is one of the reasons that we often focus on different ways of framing things at WildStrong. Um, we focus much more on capabilities and physically doing things in the real world. Because there does seem to be something that happens that when people cross the threshold into a gym or suddenly they're asked to use a weightlifting implement, they become very afraid that they're going to do it wrong. And I think part of that is the culture that's developed around gyms and personal training. And a lot of this also comes from fear of liability and things like that. But what I would say is if you go into it without ego, and if you really just focus on that rate of perceived exertion and just being honest with yourself, saying, could I have done two more reps? And you just take your time and you don't rush the progression, it's going to be fine. I mean, generally, I find that when people get injured in any kind of weightlifting, it's usually because they're not listening to their bodies or they're chasing ego. And one thing I will say though is if you're doing a movement and it doesn't feel good, sometimes we'll talk about this idea of movement being contraindicated for specific people. If a movement doesn't feel like it's a good match for you, you don't need to do that movement. And what I mean is there's no rule in the world that says you must squat. There's tons of other options that are going to give you the same benefits as squatting. There's no rule in the world that says you must deadlift or you must be able to do a pull-up or whatever, even if your shoulder hurts. So really what it's about finding different ways to find a good stress, a positive stimulation that's going to give you an adaptation without feeling like you ever need to do a movement. And within that, it's just about creating a daily habit. Um, so there's a lot of fear about engaging with resistance training, but I think that once people start and they just have a go at it and they don't push themselves too hard, I think that people become very, very good at listening to their bodies. Um, the numbers just bear out that it's a much safer activity than most people imagine is.
Okay, I'm just going to do one very quick one that was on specific sets and reps. Where has it gone? How would one change the activity, e.g. a squat or a pull, across a superset? Is the superset a collection of sets, e.g. a set of squats and set of pulls?
Yes, so I think what would probably be good is if we did a follow-up webinar on really talking about progressions and structure of things. I didn't want to lay it on people too deep because listening listening to someone talk about sets and reps can be a big ask for people, especially if we haven't talked about what the movements look like and things like that. So I think there's scope for a second follow-up where we can talk about specific movements and progressions. So a superset just means that you do movement A and B before you go back to the rest again. So the example that I used is squats and some kind of pulling. So one superset would be you do your set of squats, you do your set of rows or pulls, then you take the rest. And then when you go back again, you do your squats, you do your rows, and then you do your rest. Um, and supersets became really popular in the early 2000s just because they're a more efficient way to organize your sessions because you can actually do one muscle group and then you can do a non-competing muscle group and then you can rest. So essentially what it does is it cuts your rest in half and it just means that you have less downtime. There are lots of different ways to do supersets. The intensity of the superset, I don't want to get bogged in the weeds, but I'm doing what are called straight sets, which just is very conservative and just try to do the same number across the board. Your sets will feel a little bit harder over the course of the session, but that's built into a very conservative progression. And what I mean is, if let's say you do a set of six squats, you do a set of six squats, and then your last set, you feel like you can only really do a set of five, that's fine. Do the set of five. And when you're able to do the six, six, and six across the board, 2 sessions in a row, it means you've built up enough strength so you can add a little bit more challenge, by increasing weight.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in. If you can go to the next slide, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Back one. There we go. So next steps for everyone. Obviously, that was a huge amount of information to cram into an hour. And according to the survey results that a lot of you filled in, most of you, I think it was about 55% of you have sort of started strength training in some way, but either hadn't managed to be consistent with it or just hadn't really sort of gelled with you, but you know that you need to do it. A few of you, and I think it was about 25% of you, who have never done it at all and are looking for kind of next steps. So my next steps would be, there's loads of information in this webinar, so do of course rewatch it, and we will send you the slides at the end of this webinar. There's a whole sheet of extra resources that you can click on. The big thing that we got a lot of feedback, and we actually, Andrew, you can go to the next slide, please. There we go. We're working on an online course. We don't often do online courses. I think my issue with them is that I often sign up for a membership or an online course, and then I kind of do week one and I do week two, and then I just get bored and stop doing it. Andrew's much more disciplined in that respect. I find that I need somebody to sort of know that I'm going to be meeting them. But recently I've been doing quite a few live courses, which means a live call every week. So there's an element of that you feel that you're part of something, and you have a Q&A, and it feels a bit more individual, for me, it feels a bit more individualistic, so that if you are coming at it from nothing and you don't know where to start, then there is space and time to play around with things that feel good for you. We would love your feedback on this. If you can scan that QR code, there's a very, very short survey. So if you're interested in joining us on this next course and you want to be part of the kind of early intake, we're taking feedback to kind of guide us a bit, and obviously you'll get nice mega discounts. So please do let us know if you'd be interested in that, and that will give you more space to kind of build a program that works for you. Obviously, there are so many nuances, and in all of this, we don't want to kind of have a broad brush. Today was just a little bit of scaffolding for you to kind of apply, hopefully, a useful framework. Andrew, if you can go on to the last slide. No. Anyway, there's my email. At the end of this, slide deck, there's a whole load of resources that we put together as well. Thank you so much for coming. I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't get time to answer. The last one was on equipment. We'd say a sandbag and some kind of rope that you can loop over it. So it could be a TRX or a suspension trainer, but something so you can get some pulling in. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And oh, you're watching on your phones, you can't scan the QR code. That's fine. We'll send it out, and you can fill out the survey then. All right. Thank you very much, guys.
All right, thanks, everybody.